Conversations with Tyler is produced by the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, bridging the gap between academic ideas and real-world problems. Learn more at mercatus.org. And for more conversations, including videos, transcripts, and upcoming dates, visit conversationswithtyler.com. Hello, I'm here today with Karl Ove Knausgård, one of the great writers of our civilization, and he also has a new book coming out, which I enjoyed very much, called So Much Longing in So Little Space, The Art of Edvard Munch. Karl, thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting me.
You know, in Book 6 of My Struggle, you mention René Girard and that mimesis is a useful concept for understanding human behavior. How do you think about who or what you're trying to copy?
Who I am trying to copy?
Yes, if you believe in mimesis.
That was a tough first question, I have to say. How can I hook onto that? I think to several levels you could reply that, that question. First level would be whatever's related to literature, to the art of fiction, how to tell a story, which is something you learn through reading, and you have to have that for writing. There are just several ways to tell a story, several ways to enter a scene, several ways to write realistic prose. And for me, almost all reading I've done has, I think, subconsciously sunk into me in my own world and in my own writing. So when I, for instance, read Marcel Proust for the first time, I absolutely loved it, and I read it like I was drinking water or something, but I wasn't aware of me soaking it up at all, and I couldn't write at that time. 2 years later, I wrote a novel. It is incredibly many similarities with Marcel Proust, but I wasn't aware of it. It was just something that happened. That's one level of mimesis. The other level is the opposite, is unlearning everything you know to be able to access what I like to think of as the world we live in. Because sometimes fiction can be so mechanical, it is so locked into certain ways to look at the world, that it's more like you look into literature than to the world. And that was what I was struggling with in my struggle, trying to find a language for my experience of the world, I wasn't interested in writing a novel. I was interested in trying to get a language for my experience of the world. And I think that is the key to Edvard Munch, what he did as a painter. Very much so, because he grew up in Norway at the end of the 19th century, in a kind of a certain pictorial language, which was realism, which was naturalism, and which was a national romanticism, the glossy images of mountains and fjords and that kind of things. That was what he had available when he started. He wanted to paint. That was what he had available.
And he described his art as an act of confession, as you note. Is that true of yours? Are you fundamentally in the confessional tradition?
Yeah, I think so. But what Munch wanted, I think what Munch had was some experiences, very strong experiences. He lost his mother when he was very young, and then he lost his older sister, which was even harder for him. And I think what he lacked when he started to paint was a language to express that. Couldn't do that through glossy national romanticism, So he had to break down everything he knew about painting to try to get that through what he had experienced. And that's the same thing with writing. That's what you want to do. Get that personal experience, the thing that only you feel, the thing that only you see, the thing that, get that through. And if you do that, you realize, no, that's how everyone sees it, that's how everyone feels. But that's kind of the thing you have to try to reach, to tap into. And when I started to write My Struggle, I didn't know that existed. I just wanted to do it for my own sake, more or less. And yeah, it was confessional. It was.
I've reread a lot of your work in the last few months. And what struck me more is what in a sense, conservative writer you are. At first I thought of you as a radical, but if you think of this long-standing pietistic religious tradition of self-scrutiny, you have Rousseau, Goethe, even Swedenborg, August Strindberg. I now see you as very much in that tradition, that you're the next Nordic confessional and quite religious as a writer in a way. Would you accept that characterization?
Pietistic, I will accept, and a part of that Nordic tradition, I will very much accept. Religious, that's a bit more difficult to relate to.
You wrote a whole book about angels, and it's striking. Swedenborg, Strindberg, they were obsessed with angels.
Yeah, it's true.
You're obsessed with angels.
Yeah,
why the
true.
combination of angel obsession and confessional from the Nordics, including you? What's the unity there?
It's that the obvious thing in regard to that is that a pietistic Christianity and is a very personal relation to God, very intimate relation to God, much more than a collective, play like religion as Catholicism would be, much more internal than external. And as a novelist, that's the confessional path, so to speak. But these things you don't think about. These things you just do. And if you are born into a culture, that culture becomes part of you. That language becomes part of you. And something of that you have to challenge. Something of that you are not aware of. It's just part of you. But I have, there's certain writers I do really love, and I think that is part of my culture, and I think I'm similar to them because of many different things. But these things you are talking about is kind of more a cultural, deep layered things, the pietism. These are not things you think about. This is things that just happens, I think. It's very unmodern, that's true. It's very old fashioned, that's
exactly.
True. Yeah.
Arnold Weinstein has a book on Nordic culture, and he argues that the sacrifice of the child is a recurring theme. It's in Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling. It's in a number of Ibsen plays, Bergman movies. Has that influenced you? Or are you a rejection of that? Are you like Edvard Munch, but with children? And that's the big difference between you and Munch, the painter? I told you we ask different questions.
Yeah. You said different, you didn't say difficult. Yeah, because there was a lot of grouping together here. You had Kierkegaard and the sacrifice of Isaac,
yes,
the biblical story, which basically is a story about faith and what it is to believe in God and what it demands to believe in God, the completely irrational level it takes to believe in God. The leap out in the unknown, which you have to take. It's an interesting thing going on in that essay, which is a wonderful essay about Abraham sacrificing Isaac, is that it also has some small parts about breastfeeding in between, which is incredibly strange. And I've been thinking a lot about that. What is that? But it's moving away from something. It's going from a mother into society, and the leap of religion is going from the society and into the unknown, into the things we don't really know about, the things we don't have language for. There is another very interesting Nordic poet called Inger Christensen. She wrote a collection of essays, which is really brilliant, and she talks about those kind of border areas. Is a matter of language, what we can express and what we not can express. And those in science, those are, the string theories, or that's the things we don't know. That's the unknown. And the border is the language. We don't have language for it. We can't really. And she also said that like a letter in a book cannot read what's around it, cannot read the book. We are the same in the world, We cannot read the world. We're part of it. But that was Kierkegaard. And I find it hard to connect Kierkegaard in regard of children, the sacrifice of children, and Bergman. Bergman is a completely different somehow.
The children are abandoned, both in his life and in the movies.
I know. There is a Bergman's workbooks just came out in Sweden. So it's not his diaries and it's not his, his place, but it's kind of in between state. All notes he took when he was working with things. And it's incredibly interesting because you can see how a film surfaces from almost nothing and just become a film, and you see all his struggles and you see all of that. But in one particular passage, he wrote about a film he wants to make, and then he said, today my grandchild died, and that was it. Just a little passage, like he really didn't care. And a normal person, he would have filled that person completely. And then that little episode turns up in his next film, that the child is drowning. And there is another episode from Bergman's life that when his son was lying on his deathbed, he refused to have his father to come there. And that's a very, very strong statement.
Sure.
So you have this almost archetypical artist putting his art before his children, before his family, before everything. And as you have also Doris Lessing did the same, abandon her children to move to London and to write. And I've been kind of confronted with that as a writer, and I think everyone do, because writing is so time consuming, it's so demanding. And when I got children, I had this idea that writing was a solitary thing. I mean, I could go out to small islands in the sea, could go to lighthouses, live there, try to write in complete, be completely solitary and alone. So when I got children, that was an obstruction, for my writing, I thought. But it wasn't. It was the other way around. I've never written as much as I have after I got the children, after I started to write at home, after I established writing in the middle of life. It was a crawling life everywhere. And what happened was that writing became less important. It became less precious. It became more ordinary. It became, less religious or less sacred. It becomes something ordinary. And that was incredibly important for me because that was eventually where I wanted to go, into the ordinary, mundane even, and try to connect to what was going on in life. Life isn't sacred. Life isn't, uplifted. It is ordinary and boring and all the things we know. So that you have these myths, and they work for some, they don't work for some. But you can relate to them. I have a friend, he's a brilliant writer, and he always says, this is when you want to create something, you have certain, I don't know the English word, you have certain things that's fixated. What do you would call them? Premises or
assumptions or axioms.
Yeah, you just have to accept them and work inside of them. That's the only way. So if you can't write, that's the base. Then you have to start to write out from that fact, And I think that's the best advice I ever got, to accept everything that happens. So if you have many children, it's a good thing. If you don't have children, it's a good thing. It's like you have to embrace it because that's your life, that's where you are, and writing should be connected to that, or painting or whatever it is.
Your focus on Nazi history in part of Volume 6 of My Struggle, is that a kind of confessional for Norway and Knut Hamsun, or the parts of Norway that were attracted to Nazism? How is that connected to the fact that you wrote a confessional about your own life? Since clearly you have no sympathies for a Nazi regime at all, but there's a connection from your culture, history.
Yeah, it's many connections. One would be that when my grandmother died, we found Mein Kampf in the chest in the living room. What was that book doing there? Had they read it? And I realized it was kind of common thing in Norway to have that book. It was kind of common thing to cooperate with the Nazi regime. When I grew up in Norway, the story we were told at school was the heroic one, the resistance and how every evil civilian resisted. But the fact is that Norway was, the wheels were rolling and the society was working, and it has to be a lot of cooperation with the Nazis. And my other grandfather, he befriended an Austrian officer that was posted where he lived. And when I grew up, there was reminiscence from the war, like bunkers where we were playing at, and it was like war was, in one sense, incredibly distant, but when I started to think about it, incredibly close. It was my grandparents' parents' world, really. But that wasn't the reason why I started to write. The reason was coincidental, basically, because I called my book My Struggle, which is the English translation of Mein Kampf, and then I had to read it. And then I realized Hitler's book is he's writing about his own self. I'm writing about my own self. There's the same title. I started to read him, and I got incredibly intrigued by what I read, because there was so much, not that he was lying, but there was so much that was unsaid, so much that, he twisted his life into something completely different. It couldn't be true. And I just dived into that and started to read more about it and try to find out what kind of man he was and how all this could happen. Well, it started out like it started in the book. It's a reflection about names, because I couldn't use my father's name in the book. That was, my family forbid me that. So I started to be interested in and look around what names really are, what they signify. And then I stumbled across a Romanian poet who wrote in German called Paul Celan. His parents died in Holocaust, and he was Jewish, and he wrote post-war in the language of the Nazis.
Best poet of the 20th century, perhaps.
Yeah. And there is this...
Maybe Rilke.
No, I think Paul Celan, maybe. But anyway, he wrote this incredibly intriguing poem where almost nothing can be named. There's no names, and it's like it's almost impossible to say anything. It's like the language is completely broken, so there's no connection between the element in the language. And I read that, and I wrote about it, and I realized this is and it's about Holocaust, of course. And this is the end of what was started with my struggle. And then that was the movement in the book, and that was the movement because Hitler also wrote in German, and he also wrote, you could read it, it's bad, but you could say whatever you want, but the fact that you could actually read him is intriguing, and you could see everything he wants to do is in the book. So I wanted to describe that path from Hitler to Celan, and it's the only part in the book that's not about me. But it is, of course, about me. But and it's the only part that's not about our time. It's about the past. So it's kind of a place, kind of a dark mirror in the book where you could see everything, get a perspective to everything. And it's the only part I found really, pleasure in writing, because it was so much I discovered during writing that, and it wasn't about me, which is a burden to do, but that was different. It's about the generation that grew up with the First World War and made Second World War happen.
So many great Norwegian writers, Ibsen, Sigrid Undset, Knut Hamsun, there's nationalism in their work. Yet today, liberals tend to think of nationalism as a kind of unspeakable evil of sorts. So how do we square this with the evolution of Norwegian writing? And if one thinks of your own career, arguably it's your extreme popularity in Norway at first that drove your later fame. What's the connection of your own work to Norwegian nationalism? Are you the first non-nationalist great Norwegian writer? Is that plausible? Or is there some deeper connection?
I think so much writing is done out of a feeling of not belonging. If you read Knut Hamsun, he was a Nazi. He was a full-blooded Nazi. We have to be honest about that.
His best book might be his Nazi book, right? He wrote, and he was, 90?
Yeah.
On Overgrown Paths?
Yeah.
To me, it's much more interesting than the novels, which are a kind of artifice that hasn't aged so well.
Yeah.
But you read On Overgrown Paths, you feel like you're there.
Yeah.
And it's about self-deception.
It's true. It's a wonderful book. But I think Hamsun's theme, his subject, is rootlessness. It's a kind of in a very rooted society, in a rural society, in a family-orientated society, like Norway has been, in a small society. He was like a very rootless, very urban writer. He went to America, and he hated America, but he was America. He had that in him. He was there in late 19th century, and he wrote a book about it, which is a terrible book, but still he was there, and he had that modernity in him, and he never wrote about his parents, never wrote about where he came from. All his characters just appears, and then something happens with them, but there's no past, and I found that incredibly intriguing, just because he become the Nazi, he become the farmer, he become the one who sang the song about growth, what do you call it, markensgrød,
growth of the soil.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like he's fighting himself doing that. He is not your nationalist. He's incredibly complex, and the interesting thing is that you can see that struggle in his writing. And
is your own American travelogue a revision of Knut Hamsun's in some way? Like, well, Norway's going to get it right this time.
No, but I do actually have thought about doing that, go in his footsteps, because he was there for a quite long time. He drove tram in Chicago, did a lot of things, and it's an exciting story, really. But anyway, the thing with writing in his case is that he's getting so close to the world and to the people in his writing. It's so complex that he's not a Nazi in his writing, but in his essays and in his speeches, there's a big distance. There is a Nazi, and that what literature can do is to get you so close that these things like nationalism just disappears because they don't exist on that particular level. You have to move away from the world to be able to establish a distance to be able to talk about these things at all. So. But Norway is a nationalistic country. It's not in I don't think it's in any bad way at all, really. It's a very innocent. Norway is a very innocent country.
What's the worst thing about living here in London?
The worst thing? The
worst thing.
I think it's, to me, being an outsider, it's both the worst and the most interesting, and that's a huge difference between the classes. It's the extreme poverty, and then you just, you walk up a hill and it's incredibly rich. And it's also very, very much, it's not only a matter of classes, but it's, in the area I live, there's a rather poor area. It's a black area. And then you go up the hill and it's a white area. And it's those kind of things I think it's kind of a hopelessness, really, to be here, because you can't do anything about it. It's in the structure, in the society. But then also it makes it incredibly, the variation incredibly, and the richness incredible. And so it's a very much an alive city. Coming from Norway, it's very different. It's like all kind of things going on simultaneously, which is incredibly interesting and nice to, at least I'm not know if it's part of it, but to see and to be, around. But it has that backside with the privilege being, going around and around and around and around in the same kind of class, and the privilege the same. And there's no kind of way they connect. You can't move from one to the another. That's Scandinavian society is much more egalitarian in that sense.
As you well know, Hans Jaeger was a seminal influence on Edvard Munch. And you can think of him as a highly intellectual, cynical nihilist. Munch knew him in his early years. Has there been a Hans Jaeger figure in your life who's a formative influence? It doesn't come through in your books.
You mean personally or through reading?
Who's your Hans Jaeger?
I don't have a Hans Jaeger, but I have this writer I really admire, and he's really something.
Who's that?
It's called Tlön. He's not translated into English. He's very wild as a person, wild as a writer. He has inspired me a lot and shown me what's possible to do in writing. but he's so particularly that it's hard to translate him. But it could be like if he had been writing in English, he would have been, I guess, the level of Thomas Pynchon or whoever. He's that good, but he's so idiosyncratic that it's hard to translate him. Yeah, but he's not my Hans Jäger, but he's an influence.
Edvard Munch, he was known for beating his paintings, abusing them, not treating them very well. Have you ever done the same with your books?
I'm a kind of a careless person, so I've and I don't take backups, and I have window open. It's raining on my computer. I've lost my computer down on the tracks with trains, and I've lost them, and but it always turns out well. But that's not the same. But I don't care about how a book look. I don't deal with that part of it at all. And when I'm done with a book, there's hardly no editing. So I just leave it and publish it, and I want to move on. Because it's the process of doing this that interests me, not the result. And I really hate it when a book is done, because then I know it will take a few years before I will get into something else. So in that I can recognize Munch. He hardly finished a painting in his life. He just and he was very reckless with his paintings, and it is a certain aesthetic in that as well. It's I've been writing that book. It's like the difference between Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. Dostoevsky really didn't care. He could just, didn't have to describe it fully. Just a few sentences done with that, and go on and go on and go on, looking for something, like a flame or something burning or something, the intensity of something he was looking for. Tolstoy, he wrote about everything and painted it fully and did so wonderfully, but it's completely different aesthetics, and they reach completely different places. And when I was young, I thought Dostoevsky was the primary, the one that had, reached the far. Now I'm older, it's Tolstoy, really.
Edvard Munch, he stuck with Dostoevsky as an influence. Very
much so. I realized the day he died, the afternoon, the day he died, he read Dostoevsky, and then he died. So he just followed him throughout his life. And I think Dostoevsky was part of his forming his identity as a painter. Exactly what's unfinished.
Is the Scream a self-portrait of Munch? And is he wearing a mask or a death mask?
Yeah. The Scream is based upon an experience he had, walking up the hill outside of Oslo, seeing what you see in that painting, hearing the nature scream. So it's in a way, it's a self-biographical painting, and the radicality of that painting is hard to get a grip on now, I think. We're very much used to that kind of distorted ways of depicting the world. But it's a long story about it. I write a lot about it in the book, because it was fun, because that's a painting that everyone knows and everybody has a thought about, and I tried to write about it afresh. What is this? What did it do? And I can talk about it if you like, but it's a long and complicated story. I don't know if I can do it.
Let me ask you about Between the Clock and the Bed. So Jasper John's paintings are often mysterious, but he chose to redo Between the Clock and the Bed. And what is John's on about? What is Munch on about in that painting?
I don't know about the Jasper John. He's using the pattern on the bed, isn't he?
Right, yes.
Yeah. Munch made some remarkable self-portraits. I think he did so throughout his life, and he started in 18, 19, and they were all very differently, and I think they were all very good. And this is one of the very last one, and the thing with this is it's so incredibly simple. It's just a man standing there, and it's like he's showing us that this is it. It's there's no posing. There's no. It's like there's no defense, and Munch was a man full of defense, and I think painting was a way for him to get under the defense and reconnect with the world. And in this painting, that's what it do. It's like the guard is down. This is what it is.
Is autobiography a kind of defense or protective strategy for you? A way in which life cannot be a disappointment. There's always something happening you can write about. In that sense, your portfolio, so to speak, is very diversified.
Yeah, it is a place I hide. That's that it is. I mean, that's obvious. There was a wonderful sentence in a Witold Gombrowicz, Polish writer, who wrote his diaries are, I think, amongst a masterpiece of the last century. It's really brilliant. But he published his own diaries when he was alive, and when they were published, he said, I just have to take retreat one step inside myself, and that's what you do when you reveal so much about yourself. It's like you could just take a step back and it's all right. I mean, it's not even connected to you if you do that. It's like, okay, I'd never think about what people know about me, or it's the act of writing is like, for me, a place I can go to and where I am protected somehow. Publishing books is a different thing, of course, but if I try to disconnect from that, don't think about it, is that the publication of it. So what I want to do is to be in that space where I'm writing, and it's also a way of me to understand what's going on, to see things that I normally don't see, because I'm very much enclosed in myself and in my own space, and I don't really notice things, and I'm coming closed off to the world. So writing is a way of opening up also. So there's a lot of things, but I've been writing for so long now that it feels like a place I can go to. Go into that place and sit down, and I will be at peace as long as I am there. Even though I write about terrible and heartbreaking things, it still is a place of peace. And I do find reading the same thing, and I always done that. I think that was why I read so much when I was little and when I grew up. And I think I became a writer the moment I realized that space is the same. The reading space and the writing space is basically the same. And you do the same things there in those spaces.
Why does Munch have so many mediocre paintings? Some might even say bad paintings.
I think he didn't really care, I think. He wanted to capture something, and if he didn't do that at first instant, he moved on. But he kept all the bad paintings too. I found that also very interesting.
Is that a model to emulate or a cautionary tale for you?
I was curating a Munch exhibition in Oslo at the Munch Museum. So they gave me access to the magazine in the basement. And I was shocked because it was, you pulled out these enormous kind of walls. And it was like maybe 10 paintings or 5 paintings or 7 paintings or 15 paintings on them. And it was a completely mix-up with masterpieces, terrible paintings, sketches, mediocre things, old things, new things. And it was like, being in a work of progress. If you go to a museum, you see it's everything finished, everything is almost stylish, then everything is, art. This was completely different. This was entering into a process, because the painting they have is the paintings Munch had when he died. Everything he kept, everything he didn't sell, And when I did that exhibition, I thought that as an opportunity to try, because in Norway at least, you can't really see Munch, because you've seen it, he's so big and you see all the paintings so many times that you can't really experience them. So I tried to use the other paintings to give a new access to Munch, what he was doing. And amongst them was also bad paintings.
You've bought a Munch, right? Head of a Woman?
Yeah.
Why buy only one? Why not buy a second? What is your thinking on the matter?
Yeah, it was expensive.
You enjoy it, right? They're capital assets. You can resell it someday. Your heirs.
Yeah, it was hard for me to buy that one. So having a Munch in Norway is very bourgeois and very, you're very settled when you do that. But I thought my excuse was that I got a fee for the curation of the exhibition, and I thought I could use the fee for buying a Munch. So that's what I got. And it's not it's just a drawing. It's just So it's nothing really, but it's incredibly nice to see. And the thing with a good work of art is that you can see it every day and you don't get tired. It's like it gives endlessly, and it's very simple, extremely simple, but it comes something from it every day actually, which is what you want from a piece of art.
You showed up 7 minutes early for this interview. Do you think of yourself as ultimately a defender or a critic of bourgeois culture and bourgeois virtue?
I have, when I was a teenager, I was very much in opposition to it, and
but that's the typical pattern of someone who's an upholder, right?
But I don't really care. That's true. I'm too busy raising children and too busy trying to survive that I can't really afford. Think in those terms. I remember when I got my first daughter, I thought, when I was full time with her, I thought it was, this is very unmasculine, and this is, taking away my identity, but then I had 3 children and then 4 children, and who cares? You just deal with them and try to be good and go on, and it's the same now. It's about that. If that's bourgeois, if that's what it is, I don't care.
You've written in great detail about raising your children, but looking back, what is it you feel you understand now that you didn't then? If you were to add in a footnote.
Oh.
Because retrospective memory is quite different from experience in the moment.
Yeah. That's hard. There's so many things I did that I wish I hadn't done. But that's most
of them
life.
Don't matter, right?
Yeah, but that's life. That's how it is, and you can't undo it. And you do have to experience things and learn things, and you can't. I can't tell a young father what to do, what to not to do. You have to find out yourself. And the thing about the book, which I'm happy about, is that it covers a process, and I wasn't aware of that really, but a very short period of time really. I wrote it in 2 years. And as you say, I've forgotten everything now in my head, but it's in the book, it's captured in the book. You see how I was thinking, you see, what mistakes I did or not did or whatever, but it's still, it's like a slice of life that's in those books.
Is it possible at all to enjoy your works on audiobook, or is the use of voices different from yours, too discordant for stories that are so personal, that are so you, so confessional?
No, that's, I don't read my books and I don't listen to them. But I have in Germany, they have readings very different from here. It's readings. So you have like an interview with the writer for maybe 5 minutes, and then it's like 1 hour of reading. And they have, when it's a foreign writer, they have actors reading. And that has been some incredibly nice experiences if there is a good actor reading. It's like he makes the book into, has nothing to do with me. Is it better
than you?
Yeah. But it's like then it becomes proper storytelling, and it becomes literature, and that's very strange to witness, but also very nice.
You're obviously very fluent in English. What do you feel the English language reader loses in the translation from the Norwegian?
I think the translations are excellent. Donald Bartlett, he translated 5.5 of the 6 books. Martin Aitken, the last part of book 6. He asked me in the beginning if I wanted to, how hands-on I wanted to be the translation. And I said, I don't want, you can do whatever you want to. I don't want to have anything to do with it. And then I remember getting book 5 in the mail, and almost accidentally I started to read, and I just kept on reading because it was so well done, and it was in English. It was kind of removed from me, but still I recognized everything, and I think it's a world-class translator, Donald Bartlett. But the interesting thing in that regard is that I have another translator for my other books. She's a poet. She's half Norwegian, half American, called Ingmar Bergman. She translates my language completely different. It's a completely different feeling of her language than his language. Both are brilliant, but in very different ways. He's much more translated it into an English novel, and she's much more translating it into a Norwegian feeling English. And she's much more close to my language, and he's much more above. And both comes from the same writing. Very different, both very good. But you see the one, they have different qualities, so to speak.
Why do we put dead bodies in the basement rather than the attic?
Yeah, good question.
You asked it yourself in book 1.
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
To pursue your father's question, how many people in solo car accidents are actually suicides?
Yeah, exactly.
Are all Swedes crazy?
Not all.
Not all. Which Ingmar Bergman film has influenced you the most, and why?
sitting here with you, I can't really think of any Ingmar Bergman film.
You once said Wild Strawberries was your favorite, but favorite may not be the same as influence.
No. I think Sins from a Marriage is an incredibly good TV series.
That's the best movie ever made if you watch the whole thing through, I think.
Yeah. I think that's his richest and best. And yeah, I think so. I love Persona. And I do actually, even I know Lars von Trier hates it, I do like Fanny and Alexander also.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a fairy tale touch to it, which I like. But no, it is Sins from a Marriage, I think.
I like Smiles of a Summer Night very much. The Mozartian feel, the Shakespeare connection. Yeah. It's a very alive movie for me.
Yeah.
Peter Handke, what kind of influence have his novels had on you?
That's hard. I'm discussing him and his influence in book 6, actually, because he is a writer I absolutely admire, and I think my writing is, this doesn't reach up to his knees, his writing's knees. But My Year in the No Man's Bay is a book that I read. I must have been in the 90s when it came out, before being a writer myself, or was it exactly at the moment I started to be a writer, I think. And that was very influential. And his writing, about the things that not belong in a story, and the things that really don't belong in a landscape, the areas between the city and outside of the city, the railway tracks, the grass, the fences, the kind of the world as it is outside of the story, I think. And he's just I don't know, but I always, and the book about his mother is absolutely fantastic, I think.
Is Elena Ferrante the main contender for having bested your achievement? If we're handing out lifetime achievement awards for contemporary serious fiction.
I've only read one Ferrante book, and that was Days of Abandonment.
Yes.
And I would have, cut off my left arm to write that book. I think it was so absolutely brilliant. So
try the Neapolitan.
I know. It's the same. I have problem with things I know is very good to enter it, because I'm not a jealous type, but I feel, I will in the end. But that book, Days of Abandonment, was really, really outstanding good. And luckily, there's no competition here, so there's nothing to. I mean, I do what I can do, and then you have incredibly good writers everywhere in every country. So, and when I'm outside of a novel, I just look at them and I think it feels so hopeless. How are they doing this? How are they managing to do this? And if you think like that, you can't really write. It has to come. Has to be personal, has to come from the inside, has to be within something without looking out. And what you're talking about that's outside of books. And then you can start and be jealous and think, or why did, he get that grant and I not, and why did I get so bad reviews and stuff? That's worthless. It's completely worthless. And I try to stay away from it as much as I can.
But we know Ibsen was obsessed with medals and honors, right?
Yeah, he was.
Was that a character flaw?
It's a very funny flaw, I think.
When
and
you
also
share
the fact
or not?
That I don't share that, no. But he had also a mirror in his hat, so he could take out his hat and look himself, which is also very funny. And he was a very little man, loving medals and having a mirror in his hat. That's funny.
From another literary tradition, take Calvino, Borges, Cortázar. Are they, in your view, in some ways overrated? And is your objection to them ultimately a political one?
No.
They're running away from life in a way, correct?
No, I feel quite the contrary. Borges, I think, is superior. I think he's a master, really a master. And a writer I've learned a lot from, not in ways of telling the story, but what the story tells you about the world. He has been very influential in my worldview, basically, especially one called Tlön, Uqbar. It's a short story. I think it's just the best short story I've ever written, I think.
We agree on that, actually.
Yeah. I think it's Calvino is less, Calvino had, Cortázar is also very good, but he's not Borges, I think. And Calvino, I love. I mean, the Baron in the Tree, or what it's called, is one of my favorite book. So, and I you know, if I could write like them, I would, but I can't. I have every time I have something fantastic, not right. I mean, in that sense, something that really could happen. I try to write it. I can't make it work. Just don't have it in me. Has to be some sort of realism. I have to believe in it myself. And the magic with Borges is that you believe it completely. He makes it completely believable. And his essays are, you know, absolutely wonderful. And in every little essay, every short story almost, you could pull something out and of value. So he's absolutely one of my favorites.
Is Magnus Carlsen going to withdraw from the World Chess Championship cycle?
Chess is not my world.
Has liberalism exhausted itself?
Maybe not liberalism, maybe capitalism.
There's something about the aesthetic. People in the early 20th century, Hamsun included, seemed to think that a vital sense of the aesthetic, maybe it didn't quite have to be fascist, but it had to move the artist somewhat in a direction which we today would mostly consider unpleasant. Do you think a strong notion of the aesthetic and liberalism are totally compatible?
Good question.
T.S. Eliot would be another example of someone who moved in a quite unsavory direction.
Yeah, I don't know really. I wonder if, you know, fascist literature, if that's even possible. I can't. It's like those are, you know, those two concepts are not able to.
But liberalism in literature is also tricky. So you take Romain Rolland, who was a great classical liberal. He wrote books that everyone read at the time, but they're mostly forgotten. They're seen as a little flat.
Yeah. I don't know what do you mean by liberalism in this.
The notion of a particular neutrality across values, which government then enforces by having impartial laws, and people believe strongly in some underlying notion of neutrality. Doesn't that clash with the aesthetic impulse at some level?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. That's what you meant. Yeah.
And in your own thought, how do you reconcile those two things?
What I'm striving for in my writing is what I call literary freedom. And it's a space where I can be free in every sense, where I can say whatever, go wherever I want to. For me, literature is almost the only place you could think of that is a possibility. And my fear is that space is closing down, and you're closing it down yourself and becoming more afraid for what you're saying. Can I say this? Can I do this? And these powers are so strong, you know. It's so hard to go somewhere, you know, no, this is wrong. Or this is, you know, I did it with my struggle because I wrote about my family, and I knew, of course, I shouldn't do this, and it is immoral to do this. And then I did it because I wanted to say what I wanted to say, and I wanted to be free and to talk about, to write about my own life in a complete and in a free way. That's also why I admire writers like, you know, Peter Hanke. We had the Yugoslavia controversy around him, and we have a lot of controversies around him. But what he does is he is there. He's hardcore, saying what he thinks and stands for it, no matter how ugly it looks from the outside. And that's what you can do in literature, no other place, I think. This is an internal struggle in every writer, I think. And it goes in almost all levels of society. I find it hardest to go into the private places that belong to my family and my life. But you can have all the other, you know, political topics. You have a lot of things you can think of. But it's good that it's a struggle, and it's good that it's an arena where we can have these fights and. But the notion that literature should be good, in a moral sense, or that I find, you know, ridiculous. That's useless.
As a boy, which were your favorite comic books? You've written that you loved comic books growing up.
Yeah, when I was little, it was the Lee Fawkes Phantom. That was really big in Norway. A bit older, I was Modesty Blaze, but I read absolutely everything.
And what are the politics of those comic books that young boys tend to read?
The politics,
the implicit politics.
Then in the 70s, it was very sexist, very racist, and all kind of things. So my mother discovered what I actually was reading. So she said she forbid me to read comics, which was very harsh punishment, it felt at that time, but it made me start to read books. So it was a good thing in the end. But she was completely shocked by what I was reading, and it was common. But that was the 70s. I think it has changed. Maybe, I don't know.
Now, you've spent some time in a creative writing program, is that correct?
Yeah.
Did you learn much there, or was it just a waste of your time?
I learned a lot. What can I say? I was like running into a wall. I was running full speed into a wall, and I fell down, and I lay down for like 6-7 years. I couldn't write after that. I was so young when I started. I had all this illusion about myself and about literature and what I could do, and I couldn't do anything. And I felt like they were ridiculing me, and they were actually. And then it took many years, and then I could write. And what I learned, I met, the world literature there.
Yes.
And I met also a writer that he's now his best writer. He's called Jon Fosse, and he was 29 at the time, and he was a teacher there. His notion of quality is absolute, and he was very, very important to me, just because he showed me where the level should be. I haven't reached that level, but I'm above where I was when I was 20 at least, and it was very good to know that this is literature. This is what literature can do. But it was completely terrible for me at the time, and many years afterwards, because I had no self-confidence. They took away all my self-confidence. I couldn't write.
The creative writing program took away your self-confidence. Yeah. And that was a good thing.
In the end, it was a very good thing.
Yeah. How did you get your self-confidence back?
I haven't got it back.
Haven't got it back?
No, but I have helpers to help me. So the one who picked me up from nothing, and he's still my editor. I really couldn't write when he saw something I've written and believed in me. He still believes in me, and he has to tell me that every week, that what I'm doing is interesting, what I'm doing is good, and that he believes in me. And he's done so for 20 years now. Without him, I wouldn't have been a writer. And I have also friends who do the same thing, said, okay, this is good. Don't give up. Keep on writing. I need it, because if not, I wouldn't have the strength to do it. Maybe I would, but it makes my writing life much easier to have helpers.
Your first book in English, but I think your second book overall, A Time for Everything. Why did you write a whole book about angels?
I really don't know. I've always been interested in the physicality of man, the matter, the brain itself, the physicality of the brain, the way we are, animals, the way we eat, and the way we take the world in, and the primitiveness of us. And then, the heaven above, all the things we dream of. And when I read the Bible, something that occurred to me was the physicality of the angels. That's such a wonderful image. And I thought, okay, they're eating in the Bible, and they're walking, with God in the Bible. And I thought, what if I read the Bible from that perspective? What happened to the angels? Where are they? Because they saw angels before, we don't see them. And then I thought, okay, maybe they have been tempted to be in the physical world too much, and then kind of been almost centrifuged into the world and been part of the world and can't escape, and they're still here around us. That was the thought. And it's in a kind of a way, it's a metaphor of what happened with religion. Why we not, many of us don't believe anymore. Why there's no heaven above us, except, commercials and TV programs and stuff. What happened? What happened with religion? What happened with God? What happened with heavens? How come we are all down here now, and what's that about? And that was not why I read it, but that was the outcome of write it. But that was the outcome of the writing of that.
And why the fascination with the Cain and Abel story?
It's
right. It's family struggle. It's rivalry.
Yeah, it's true, and it's only like 8 lines or something in the Bible. It's almost nothing, and it's so rich, and it's bottomless. They have been discussing that and reading that for thousands of years, and you can still say something new about it. That simple story, the brother killing another brother. I'm just reading about Gnosticism now, and they take a liking, some of them, for Cain, which is, they like to turn everything upside down. So God is really the devil, and this really is hell, and Cain is really the good one, the one to look into. And it's just an endlessly fascinating thing, and it means so much, so many layers of meaning in that simple story. And that's the best part of the Bible, those very short stories, incredibly rich and layered with meaning.
To close, why don't we return to your new book? Again, it's called So Much Longing in So Little Space, and give us your take on Munch's The Scream. You referred to this earlier.
My take on Scream. That's what happens when you're writing. You just start. I just sat down with a Munch book. Thought, okay, I'll write a book about Munch. Let's see where this goes. And then you just enter it, and then comes something back, and then 2 months later you have a book. And The Scream is, it's one of the most iconic paintings there is. Everyone, I think, have seen it. It's so recognizable, and it's so, almost we have an intimate knowledge of it. We see it, But the painting is about the opposite. It's about something very strange. It's about something, it's hard to do this in English, but it's about the world being almost unrecognizable. It's just seeing how strange the world is. And we do this in that painting that we instantly recognize. And it's a painting about anxiety, and anxiety is incredibly painful. So it is a painting about pain. But we see, we see $1 million, we see its fame, we don't see that. But the interesting thing for me was, when I wrote about it, was what kind of paintings Munch had access to, and how they painted at that time. Because no matter how painful things were, they were always taking place in a space, in a room. And having that space, having that room, that the events in that room will one day be over. Something new will take place there. If Madame Bovary is very painful, the ending, but that world will continue. And there is a kind of a comfort in that. There isn't any acuteness in it. You could see it, it will pass, and you observe it from the outside. So you see it at a distance, you see something painful, so a sick girl at a distance, and it's in another room, and it will pass. So there is a comfort in that. What Munch did in that painting is to remove that room, to remove that space, because all the landscape is subdued to the person in the painting. So it's his landscapes. So there's no room in it. There's no neutrality. It's when that person is gone, the landscape is gone. So there is no space and there is no time. It's an instantly painting. It's acute. It's like it's happening now, and we share the space with the painting. And that is the radicality of the painting. That there's no space and there's no comfort. It's an acute thing. It's instant, and you have to relate to it. You can't see that painting without relating to it. No, I mean when you saw it for the first time. And the interesting thing now, I think, is that that's a fair description of the world how it is now. It is an instant world. We get access to painful things that happens when it happens. I mean, today there was a massacre in New Zealand. The minute it happens, we know about it, we relate to it, we feel the pain, we see the pictures. That didn't just happen. That didn't happen at Munch's time. It was unheard of, Now that's the world we live in, the world of Scream. There's no space between us and the world. Everything comes bombarding us, So what the art has to do now is the opposite. It is to create spaces, it is to recreate rooms. And I was thinking about that, and also writing in the book I was in an exhibition with Anselm Kiefer here in London as White Cube. It was absolutely magnificent, but there was no people in it. It was only spaces, only room. And it was kind of mythological rooms. It was like it was giving space to events that wasn't even there back somehow. And I think both Kiefer and Munch are great artists, but they live in different times and they had different missions. And for Munch, it was very important to give access directly to the pain and to the distorted vision of the world, and to give a more true account of how it is to be, I think he wanted to do. And now it's the opposite, because now we need space, and we need comfort, and we need time, and we need, something. I'm not sure if artists should do that, but that's what I thought when I started to write about Munch. And another interesting thing is that exactly the same thing is going on in the literature at that time, You have the epic novel with all the characters, all the rooms, Tolstoy. is a very good example, because that is a book about rooms. And then you have, for instance, then Knut Hamsun in Hunger, which is just one person and his distorted version of the world that exists. And when he dies, the world disappears, you know.
Karl, thank you very much for coming by.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Conversations with Tyler. You can subscribe to the podcast in iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast app. And if you like this podcast, please consider rating it on iTunes and leaving a review. This helps other people find the show.